Well, look at you.
Anyway, well, look at you. Look at us.
Yeah. Man,
Together
I
again.
Had such a shit show of a gig yesterday. It was crazy.
Oh yeah.
It was. I was subbing for somebody who hosts a jam here, and the rule of this jam is that you have to know the songs ahead of time. You sign up for what songs you're going to play, and it was just nuts. It was like somebody signed up for Seven Nation Army, which has got to be like the easiest song of all time.
Yeah.
So first of all, he said he was going to play it in D, and so the host of the jam was like, "What is this sacrilege? You can't play that song in D." But anyway,
God.
But
what's it normally in? It's an E.
It's an
normally,
E.
right?
It's an E. Yeah. And so the bass player didn't get the memo that it was in a different key. It was playing it in E, and then the guitar player who said he was going to play it in D was actually playing it in C sharp. And they just both were playing, and they didn't stop.
Wow!
And I had to stop them. I was like, "Whoa, guys, stop!"
Is anybody listening to anybody? That's crazy.
It sounded so bad.
And these are professional musicians?
No. I mean, it's like amateurs who come and they're like trying to get into gigging or something. But
okay, that's a little bit more acceptable. But yeah, no, that's funny. Are you now? I'm trying to get the idea.
They were like mad at me. I was trying to tell the bass player like D, and then I was like doing it like this, and he was like, "I don't know what that means. What are you talking about?"
Right.
And I was like, "I don't know. I'm trying to help you. You didn't read the sheet. It said D."
Well, the funny thing is, I feel like our entire time I've known you, you've always just you're always talking about how people are always getting mad at you. It's just funny, you know. It's like I feel like, which makes me wonder. Actually, I do wonder if you're being hyperbolic and if you think people are more mad at you than
maybe
they actually
I feel
are.
like he was stressed because it was going really bad.
Yeah,
and he was just like, "I don't know what that means." He was like, "Okay."
You're like, well, be a better musician then, all right? Don't get mad at me. No, that's what I would have said.
I mean, kind of. I was pretty shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, I do wonder whose job it is to switch. The guitar player called the song, so I think it is the bass player's job to be like, well, what's happening here? Obviously, he's in a different key.
Well, and the fact that nobody stopped to be like, wow, this sounds horrible. Maybe we should reevaluate whether this is the right direction.
Well, the drummer was looking at me like, are we doing this? Are we just going to play through it like this?
Yeah, the drummer's the only one that has any idea about harmony, apparently.
It's pretty funny.
Well, that's man, I don't miss that kind of stuff. I'll be honest.
It was crazy.
Yeah, God. Well, that's cool. Yeah, no. I don't think I had anything fun like that. I did a TikTok gig for the first time.
Cool. How was that?
Yeah, it was actually cool. Which was just meaning you just go live at a certain time in a series of people, and you just go to other people's accounts. But it was fun. It was very fun, and it was very cool.
What'd you play?
People. I just did originals, and I did one cover. I did Eleanor Rigby.
Nice.
Yeah.
In what key?
Eleanor Rigby. D minor, actually. Now that you say it, I should have been there because I was playing Eleanor Rigby in D minor. I could have been there playing Eleanor Rigby in D minor while the bassist was playing in C sharp minor and whatever, the guitarist or whatever it was.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it would have been great.
Yeah.
No, but it was fun. I mean, it's just such a weird new world that we live in, where it's you don't have to leave your house and you can still sort of play for people. It's just interesting, this whole streaming world. And I mean, Twitch is just a whole world that I don't know if you've ever messed around with streaming on Twitch, but I don't know if people use that for
long time.
music,
I tried a couple.
Yeah, and I feel like it's more video game, and maybe DJs.
I used to watch the Whitest Kids You Know do a weekly Twitch stream during the pandemic, which was pretty fun. But then one of them died, and it got too sad.
Wait a minute. The Whitest Kids You Know, they were a sketch group, right?
Yeah, a sketch comedy group from when we were in college.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, they had that PCP, liquid PCP.
Yeah, the
sketch.
gallon of PCP.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember that. Yeah, of course I remember
It's a gallon of PCP.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow, one of them died. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Yeah, so it was fun. During the pandemic, they decided to like regroup, and they were going to raise money for a movie that they were trying to produce. And actually, they used the gallon of PCP as their money marker. So as people donated more money, the gallon got fuller of PCP.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's.
But yeah, one of them like fell off of his roof and died.
Oh, that's horrible. Wow.
Like 2 years ago now.
Wow, that's horrible.
And it was actually like the main creative guy of the group, that tall, skinny guy, Trevor Moore. Yep.
Wow, that's terrible. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. That they did a Twitch stream.
But yeah, they did it on Twitch, and it was funny because then like they'd have weird rules where they'd get demonetized or they'd get stuff pulled down.
Huh. Yeah, I don't know. I don't use it because it's really difficult to use on your phone for some reason. I don't know. It's like it's not as simple to stream on your phone as it is on like the computer.
Right.
And then, TikTok's just super easy.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. So, what have you thought of Renegade History?
Yeah, no. Well, first off, it was a much easier read than the last one. Which was nice.
It's a pretty
nice.
easy one.
Yeah. I mean, he's a much, better writer in a sense of communicating sort of to anybody. So that was nice.
Sure.
But yeah, overall, I thought it was interesting. Yeah, I mean, certainly the main thesis to sort of, which to me seemed to be that, you could say women prostitutes sort of pushed the female sexual revolution. I guess that was his thesis, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it made compelling arguments. I did sort of not like, I don't know if this is, this doesn't seem to be how most historians do it. And my understanding is Thaddeus Russell is a trained historian. Like that's what he went to school for.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of wanted more citations. It was
The book has it doesn't have citations in the way that you would normally encounter in a textbook or a book like this. That's true. I actually don't know why he does that or doesn't do that. I know that there is a movement that I can't imagine he's part of that has to do with sort of like deformalizing and like decolonizing academic writing. And so Bell Hooks doesn't use capital letters in her writing.
I don't know who
sometimes
Bell Hooks
doesn't
is.
use punctuation and things like that, and doesn't use citations because of the sort of rebelling against these formal imperialistic structures and things like that. I don't imagine that's what he's doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways that's like an even more patriarchal way to do it because it was almost like a revolution to start citing things. Like you read stuff from the 18th century and nobody cited anything.
Right.
It was like
I think that he does have a problem with peer review as an idea. And actually, I sometimes have a problem with the idea of citation if you're making an argument. I think if you're stating a whole bunch of facts, it makes sense to cite where you're getting that information from. But I think the idea that something just needs citations just because things are supposed to have citations, I think is sort of backwards. Because sometimes you're creating a logical argument in your head that adding citations is actually detracting or confusing the issue.
Well, I guess my first point to that would be, what argument are you making without facts? I mean, you're going to have a fact in there at some point,
Maybe. I think it's the thing like Plato doesn't need to cite anything if he's creating a logical argument. So you say, if the case
but he does.
is this.
No, they often cite. I mean, all the facts are citing old books in Plato. It's all like citing like the Odyssey and old stories.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. Oh, well, there's that type of citation. There's the referencing of earlier material, which actually Thaddeus Russell does all through the chapter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, okay. So I feel like we're sort of saying the same thing. All I'm saying is that, and I'm not even saying, I'm just saying I agree that there's some times where people go overboard with citations, and maybe that's what you're getting at,
Right.
where it sort of gets away from the argument. I agree. It's like there's some things that are just accepted knowledge. Like you're not going to cite everything in a scientific paper either.
Right.
You'll probably assume people know, certain things, especially if you're talking to a very specific audience. But
Right.
in this case, I don't know. It's just I was surprised by there weren't any citations, and
Yes.
he was making some claims where I was like, well, it would be nice to know
Yes.
where
Yeah.
this is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. But of course, yes. I mean, obviously he's summarizing facts, and you could tell he's referencing things because he uses people's names and everything like that, and especially when he's talking about all the madams.
It would be great if he just made all that up.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing is like he could have. I mean, I don't think he did. Obviously, he didn't. But yeah, I mean, and it really is just like I find it very useful when I'm trying to understand an argument. That's what I really like about White Rage. Actually, when I was reading it, is like she's very good about citations and that she cites a lot of things, and because she's making a lot of claims.
Right.
So.
I think that there's a
was-
problem with citation and peer review that you end up falling into the fallacy of like an argument from authority. Something isn't right because somebody else has said it. And your claim isn't correct because 10 other people have vetted your claim. That's not why it's right or wrong. That might be a good way of having some more confidence in it, but everybody can think something that's wrong.
Completely. But it adds more, it puts more onus on the person, then
Yeah.
at least you have something to hang your hat on and be like, oh, you're saying that this person said it. Well, let me go check and see.
Right. Well, especially
just
a
to make sure
fact,
you're
especially
telling the right
something like
thing.
history, where you're saying at this date,
Yes.
this thing happened. Where did you get that information? Is
exactly.
a great question.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say is that's more of what I'm getting at
Yep.
is when he's
Yep.
talking about statistics and stuff like that. Whereas I think it's very important. And again, this is just my opinion as a scientist. I
Right.
feel like that. I just think everybody honestly should be trying to be more scientific with this kind of stuff. If we're trying to get at truth, the scientific method is, I would say, the best method we have of doing that. So I think this about journalists too. It's like I think that there should be better. Like basically, I think everybody that's sort of publishing words should have some sort of rudimentary understanding of the scientific method and sort of citation and like argument, like good sort of scholastic argument building. And maybe there should be like a way everybody does it rather than having it like the historians do it this way, the scientists do it this way.
Right.
The journalists, it's okay if they cite anonymous sources, we'll just
right.
believe them.
Oh, that'd be
it's
pretty
like,
good
okay.
if you had a bibliography. It was just anonymous.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I ought to start doing that. It's just
it's
like,
pretty
why do
funny.
they get to do that? Yeah. So
No, I agree. I
but-
think it would be helpful in this book for sure.
yeah, but overall, I did think it was good, and certainly, by doing that fun, read through of his chapters, it came off much more sort of, you could say, extreme than it was when you're actually.
I mean, this is
reading it.
this is maybe not one of the more extreme chapters.
Well, so maybe that's it.
we picked kind of an easy one.
Yeah, no, it was nice because I honestly feel like most people would probably believe this now. This almost seems
Exactly
like
right.
It's not even
a lot of people would have an easy time swallowing this one. In the freedom and slavery and freedom pair, he goes into how there were actually freed slaves at the emancipation, who were petitioning the government to reinstate slavery.
Yeah, that I think I knew about because
Right.
yes, yeah,
Because they got free health care, they were sort of taken care of, and in this weird way, life was easier for them as slaves because that's what they knew, versus having to make it in the world by themselves.
right. But obviously, that was just ignorance. I assume that's the.
Well, no, I mean
Ignorance.
the thesis of the chapter is that it's more complicated, and and in many ways we do the same thing today. There are forms of quote slavery or something like that we try and get into, like social programs with the government. We try and say, please take our money and do this for us. We try and remove our own responsibility because it's more comfortable to be taken care of than to deal with it ourselves.
That's quite an argument.
Yeah. And then the other side of it, there's the slavery and freedom, is if you are free, you are enslaved by the fact that you need to do everything for yourself, which will take all of your time and effort.
That's an interesting point. I definitely do feel that, because it's like the more independent I try to be, it's like, well, okay, now I can't delegate this or that or whatever. Right. But yes, I don't do that in some cases because then I'm dependent on this other person.
Right. So, but this chapter, the thesis of sort of the prostitutes and the madams of the West being kind of the proto-feminists that paved the way for what feminists were arguing for in the 20th century, I think it's probably pretty easy for a lot of people to swallow. However, I feel like I've talked to religious people who are very, very uncomfortable with this argument.
Well, of course. I mean, the whole book or the whole chapter was also about how the religious people back then were uncomfortable with everything happening.
Right. But it's this funny idea that because prostitution is bad, nothing good can come out of something bad from sort of a religious idea. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, given some of the conversations that we've had before about...
given original sin is that, isn't it? It's like...
Well, but they argue no. Yes, I understand. Yeah, I know. But the religious argument is, no, that's separate from God. That's not from God. God didn't make that. Okay. Or something. But so the idea of prostitutes as sort of the perfect capitalists, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's the other aspect about this argument that's interesting, that I think is socially subversive, because capitalism has such a bad name at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's this weird thing where people don't really define what they mean by capitalism. They just say it's this evil thing that has to do with us having to make money or something like that. But this idea of finding a market, a real market, and employing your ability within that market to make more money than anybody. I mean, like the wages that he was talking about, citations would have been nice there. But the wages that he was talking about for prostitutes in the West and madams was insane. I mean, higher than the workers who were moving out west to build railroads and do mining and anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. That, though, I guess the one issue is that it sort of does discount the fact that there were a lot of sort of, you could say, upstanding. I shouldn't say upstanding women, but you know what I mean, like women who were sort of following, like pure. How about puritanical women?
Sure,
who were also doing a lot for the sort of feminist movement, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony.
Mm-hmm. But that's just later, right?
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was later, yes, but then there was the Seneca Falls Convention, which I think was where Stanton was. But then there was like Lowell Mills was like there was a bunch of women at this mill. I think it was Lowell Mill. Again, I took a high school class on women in history, and so this was like over a decade ago. So it's been a second, but I did write a rap about it. There's been a lot of talk about the women's movement. Now listen to me. I got the true origin. It started not in Seneca, but way before, during Jackson's era is where it hit the floor. Stanton, Anthony, Sojourner Truth, the Grimp sisters, they were in on it too. So there you go.
Yeah, so, nice.
Jackson era, 1820s. That's what I think. Now
1820s?
I remember.
Wait a minute.
Jackson?
Susan B. Anthony's the early 1900s, right?
No, but during Jackson's era is where stuff hit the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Stan Anthony's. Yeah, so, because I think that's where the Grimp sisters, but I don't know. I'm talking out of my you-know-what right now. So I'm going to just stop talking. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I just wanted to inject that as like there were a lot of other women doing things. That's what I first learned about, I guess, is the point. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to put that in there as like, of course there was, like the Seneca Falls Convention and everything like that occurring. And in the early 1800s, there was also stuff going on. But it's also the interesting thing, it's there's a few things I had issue with. But I don't know if you want me to get into it now or if there's if you wanted to.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll just finish what I was saying about. I feel like the setting the stage for it is what he's painting is like the Renegade History, where he's talking about the renegade aspect. He's actually, I think, being a little bit cheeky or kind of rude even by calling them feminists, or doing it before the feminists were doing it, because I mean he writes about this in other places too, about how feminism as a movement is really a puritanical movement, and feminists are not renegades. And trying to seek the right to vote and things like that is a very non-renegade thing to do. That's trying to be part of the system, like tie us down to this system is what they're asking to. It's like asking to be a slave kind of a thing, versus saying, I don't care about the system at all. I'm going to completely go around it and do exactly what I want to do, and do it really, really well, and make a whole bunch of money for myself, having nothing to do with any of your silly ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I think a fair point.
Well, I think you're right. I think that's that's like, to me, I feel like that's his central message, is that
I agree.
The prostitutes and madams and stuff are real renegades in ways that feminists were not.
Yeah,
asking into the system versus going around it.
Yeah. No, I get it. It's also interesting because it's like, it seems like a lot of these, I started reading the next chapter just a little bit, oh,
nice.
I don't know. So about the, white people losing their rhythm, which is funny. Yeah. Talking about the origin of sort of like, dancing in America and how the Puritans hated it and everything like that.
Was that the one where he talks about jazz in New Orleans?
He Louis might. Parma I didn't get to that point. But
okay.
It's just started by talking about how is the Puritans were trying to essentially get away from all this lecherous stuff going on in Europe, and so it was also, I guess, interesting that you constantly started hearing also about how there was all these morals from Europe that they were like didn't want to happen, that didn't want to come over and corrupt sort of the U.S.
Sure.
And yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because it's like I still feel like we sort of look at things that way even now. Is like Europe has always been a little bit more, you could say, sexually liberated, and the U.S. has still, obviously, we know this, has this puritanical root that sort of still is very much alive. And I don't know. It's just it was just making me think about how there was this whole fear about Jacobins, right, in the Revolution, and these French. It was like the Jacobins, and then there was the people in the U.S. who were trying to make a country, but it was like the Jacobins were the French, this like French group around the Revolution time that were sort of trying to, I guess you could say, well, they were trying to get rid of any sort of monarchy, it seemed like, and they were almost like, I feel like they were the precursors to the Marx movement,
probably.
But anyway, I'm getting off right now. But all I'm trying to say is that it's just interesting because I just feel like maybe it all came from that. Really, it's like is maybe there's always been this sort of like wave. This, I don't know where it's ultimately come from, but there's this moral decay that the U.S. has been trying to fend against from Europe for years. And you could say it's still trying to do it. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a good thing or not, but it's just that's kind of how I looked at it. Because then it was talking about how all the contraceptives in the 1850s were like German immigrants and stuff like that.
Right.
That were making like the first condoms out of, which is crazy, out of like animal intestine and stuff like that.
Right.
Which thank God for polyvinyls, and latex.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah. But anyway, sorry. So that was just a random thought that I had.
Well, what
I don't know.
Do you have a thought as to why that is? Why Europe is filled with these debaucherous sexual degenerates, and why the U.S. is trying to fend off that terrible influence?
I don't, because it's because unfortunately I feel like we don't know enough about. Like it was honestly making me wonder, where is this puritanical streak coming from? Is it like an old pagan Germanic thing that like we just don't remember because like nothing was written down in ancient, Gaul and Gothland, whatever you called Germany. And because, but it's also interesting because it's like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it was really anywhere else in Europe either, other than England.
You mean the Puritanism?
Yeah. I guess it maybe a little bit.
I would
in
say
Scandinavia
probably in the Netherlands and Denmark, maybe.
Yes.
Switzerland.
So I was going to say that Scandinavia. No, I don't know because I don't know enough about honestly ancient European history to say whether that's where it came from, or if it came from Asia or Africa.
If I have to take a guess, I can kind of trace back, and I don't know if this is true, but it's just a hypothesis. Your connection with Jacobins to Marxism is interesting, and I think that I would describe Marxism as a puritanical, I don't know, theology or philosophy or something like that. I think that what's interesting is
puritanical versus Puritan. I think is different.
Yeah, fine. They're not talking about God in the same way, but they do sort of have a God similar to like people who are really
you're making the
pro-democracy.
James Lindsay. Didn't James Lindsay just make this point?
Did he?
I think it was just. Yeah, I think it was.
Oh, nice.
Talking about
Okay,
this.
yeah, maybe
about how Marxism traces to Gnosticism. Basically, that's which I think honestly isn't. He's not the first person to make that argument.
Probably not.
But yes.
But what's interesting is that Marxist countries all have problems with sexual politics, and the European countries that were taken over by communism had like really, really strict censorship rules around sexual content and stuff like that. And I think the problem is that sexuality is something that's so messy and so strange because everybody, it's like with these prostitutes, men are willing to spend all of their money on it. And I don't know why. It's like this weird like sexual relationship that's very odd and is difficult to deal with if you're trying to craft a society that will behave in exactly the right way, because sexual relationships will make people behave in very erratic ways that are against their own morals, even a lot. But I feel like it probably traces somewhat back to the Catholic versus Protestant split, and Protestantism is a much more individualistic, which is kind of what we were talking about before about the freedom slavery thing. The individualism places a lot of responsibility on the self, which demands a more puritanical ethic, versus something like Catholicism, where there's a clergy where you can pass off responsibility up the chain all the way up. And monarchies are similar, where ultimately it's the king's responsibility. And so probably things like sexual immorality is less of an issue. If the society is, quote, sick or deviant, that's the king's fault. That's not my issue. Versus in a democracy, society's problems are your issue. You have to be a governor. You have to go and vote and do your best to make sure that the things that you want society to be are done. And so there's all this responsibility on you, which demands Puritanism in a way that monarchy and Catholicism probably don't.
Yes, I think I actually agree with a lot of that, and have actually thought sort of similar things. Certainly, the individualism in Protestantism versus a more collectivist sort of mentality in Catholicism, definitely.
It's interesting with England then, or in the UK, because I feel like they weren't Protestants in the same way as like the Scandinavians and stuff. And the Germans. Yeah,
no, I mean, they made their own sort of thing. And all those things you were saying are interesting because it sort of gets at this old history that I feel like I certainly forget, and I think a lot of people forget, that there has always been this tension between Southern Europe and Northern Europe, where it was for thousands of years, it was the Southern Europeans who were trying to basically go up and control the Northern Europeans.
Right.
And there was this rebellion against sort of this centralized control from the South in Rome for 2,000 years. Right. And I always looked at Protestantism as the rebellion against that, like you were saying, which is exactly that. Is like, don't control me from down there where it's beautiful. Right. I want to be up here where it's dark for 6 months out of the day, and just let me do my thing. I want to pee my name in the snow if I want to. Let me do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would need to read much more about the Jacobin, movement and everything. I just meant more that I always got the impression that the Jacobin movement was this sort of it was trying to overthrow kings, and it successfully did in France, right? And that was why they were sort of citing, why the Jacobins weren't necessarily hated by Americans during the revolution, right? They were all kind of on the same side. But then, there's this famous story about this, like one of the first French ambassadors was like this 30-year-old who was sort of a Jacobin, and he was just obviously trying to basically infiltrate U.S. and sort of supplant Washington in a sense, or at least like take over control in a way. And he ultimately ended up getting kicked out because people realized what he was doing, and he wasn't very tactful either. But the point is, I don't know. It's just when we were talking about all the sort of lower morals, and then also obviously the mid 19th century and early 19th century, you had this huge wave of immigrants from Europe, and really just the entirety into the 20th century and still now. But really, like, that was when my ancestors came over. That's probably when a lot of yours came over, I imagine. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you've been here since the Mayflower.
I personally have been here since the Mayflower.
Yeah, you're like vampiro. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think the other renegade aspect that's interesting is the prostitute movement that he's discussing versus the feminists. The sort of the whorehouses and madams are doing their own work, and they're less interested in transforming society. They're interested in doing what they're doing.
Right.
As opposed to sort of a social movement. They're not trying to make everybody prostitutes. They're trying to make themselves as successful as possible. It's very personal project focused.
And capitalist, like you were saying, they were very good capitalists and almost perfect capitalists.
But then, on the other hand, he was describing how these madams had so much power in these cities that, with the earthquake in San Francisco, how they ended up being one of the primary drivers of raising money and helping to rebuild the city and help wounded people and things like that. And also drivers of racial integration and things like that, and bringing music, bringing culture.
Yeah, no, and when they're, when you were talking about how much they were paid earlier, and how I think in one of the parts it's talking about how, like, actually a lot, like up to a fourth of the women ended up doing it not out of sort of what they had thought would be of the reason, which is, they had some horrific thing happen to them in their life. They were molested or something, or something else, and that's what sort of pushed them down this path. But it was more of just, it was a lucrative thing. They could make a lot of money, and it was honestly making me think of OnlyFans today.
Exactly, me too. That's also what I thought. Yep.
Yeah, because honestly, I think you see that happening a lot.
Yeah, and there's still people today who rail on about the social degradation of society because of that.
Yeah, like you.
Like me?
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, you have like 10 OnlyFans. Who am I talking about here?
Well, I have several of that. Yeah. OnlyFans Dad. Would you ever see that Shane Gillis sketch? It's pretty good.
It was pretty hilarious. Yeah, actually, that might be my favorite one. But I mean, it's just they open the door and he's on the Sibian. I'm doing this for you.
Do you like your new Kia Sorento?
Yeah, and he's got like a tie on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of your problems with it?
Oh, yeah. So the first one that comes to mind is at the very end. Let me find it quickly. When they're talking about... it was talking about the domination of pimps and how, it was like... It was just making it seem as if, like, when the madams had control, it was like this benevolent sort of period.
Yes,
and then
yes.
And also that there were no male pimps during that period, which I doubt was true. And that, then sort of all these regulations came in and pushed the women towards male pimps, and then the rest is history.
Right.
And look, that very well may be true, but it's just like I just feel like it was making...
It's a little too rosy of a picture.
Exactly. It's like,
yeah.
And I'm not saying any of this, like, I think I'm honestly pretty, liberal about all this stuff too. Whereas I feel like for the most part, as long as you have two consenting adults, you know, they can do whatever they want.
Including exchanging money for services.
Yeah. I think I'm sort of a libertarian in this sense. I'm just like, if somebody wants to do, I would never want to do that. Because I think I'm just, honestly, it's just like,
well, it's our puritanical society too. It's like, it's very naughty.
No. But I honestly, it's just like the things that I think about with all this is just like STDs. I mean, all of the reasons that like you look at all these biblical things and you can look at it like, oh, somebody just said we have to do these things. Or you could be like, well, pork probably had a lot of tapeworms in it back. Like you might, by eating pork, no, I'm serious.
It was a risk. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, STDs, tuberculosis, not tuberculosis. Sorry. I didn't mean tuberculosis. Syphilis. Tuberculosis is not an STD. I'm going to take this out. Clipping this.
Just bleep it. And they all have no idea what you're talking about.
No, I don't know if you remember, but in like the first episode, I was talking about how the 19th century, everybody had STDs and syphilis. And then I also brought up how everybody also had tuberculosis. So I think I just got on. Anyway, but a lot of people had tuberculosis too. And certainly if you're like in a enclosed setting with somebody with tuberculosis, chances of getting it much higher. But yeah, just herpes, all these things. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not saying people need to abstain. Right. But it's just the fact that there are sort of reasons to not like go buck wild, I guess you could say.
Right.
I've always looked at it that as somebody who's not like an overtly, it's like I would say I'm agnostic, but it's, I'm not religious. But I've always looked at some of these sort of religious norms as like, well, there is kind of a logic behind some of them. You know?
I think so.
And honestly, when they were talking about sort of the degradation of the family and everything, as like some of the things that they were saying would be the problem if, this sort of prostitution and everything was rampant. I mean, I just look at now and I'm like, dude, I don't know if it's prostitution. I'm not saying it's prostitution that is the cause of this. Certainly something's going on with the family right now.
No, absolutely.
In America.
I agree. I think.
It's just like there's obviously something going on.
Yes. I think so. You're right about that.
Well,
any other problems you had? I agree with the overly rosy thing. I think that there is one parallel in modern society with the prohibition on drugs and the black markets surrounding drugs, and like how dangerous those have become.
Where was that? Yeah, can you elaborate? I don't think I remember that part.
Well, you were talking about how things got worse as regulations on, or Thaddeus Russell was saying that things got worse for prostitutes as regulations on prostitution started to get stronger. Things with pimps, it became a much more violent market and world. And I think we see that today that is still the case, I would say, with prostitution in the full sense in the U.S. There's all sorts of weird things like you can have sex for money as long as it's on camera. As long as it's available for other people to see, that's fine. But if it's just the two of you, that's very illegal.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I never thought about it like that.
Oh, right.
I don't know why. Yeah, I honestly just never thought about it.
Like how are porn stars not just prostitutes with a camera?
It's interesting.
But the drug markets, the illegal drug markets, are super dangerous, very violent. Yeah. It's like that thing. Anywhere where there's an underground black market,
right?
You're already outside of the law, and so anything that's going to be outside of the law, like violence, human trafficking, any of this stuff, because you're already existing outside the law. So why wouldn't all that other stuff be there too?
And that was going to be my point about sort of the rosy picture that was being sort of painted with the madams in the mid 19th century. First off, also madams continued to exist into the 20th century, right? I mean, so I don't know. The way that they made it sound was like they all disappeared around like the 1910s, but I don't think that was the case. I don't know. Maybe
I don't know. I don't really know anything about what modern prostitution markets look like. My idea is not usually a madam. There are a few brothels still in operation in Nevada, I believe.
Well, and that's, I guess, my point is I feel like there are how many. Okay, so I see the point, though. Yes, the brothels were much larger and more sort of overt back in the day. But I guess my point is, like, I feel like this sort of thing probably still exists on the underground, you know, and maybe more underground.
Yeah, maybe those madams are all still there, and we just don't see them.
But I see the point that you and Thaddeus are making, that it was much more, and this is a point that he did sort of emphasize many times in the book, that it was there was like a shamelessness about it. It's like it was very in your face. They were like publicizing,
right?
You know, in some cases in newspapers about the brothels and everything like that. So yeah, I do see that. Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know. You know, one thing maybe he probably talks about this maybe in the chapters before, but it's obviously the other big sort of thing that was going on here was the Industrial Revolution. I guess that he sort of talked about that at the beginning, that, you know, there was a lot of women that were sort of moving to the cities and the new cities and everything like that. But I do wonder if that's sort of the big other thing is, did madams exist before the Industrial Revolution to the same degree? You know, or was that sort of something that, to your point, I guess, that they were like perfect capitalists that then sort of seized upon this moment of perfect capitalism in the mid 19th century. Right. There are these towns of like 2,000 men and no women. And they're like, I know how we make money. We know what they want. The smells of those towns. God forbid. and so this is the other thing, is they were talking about how sort of lawless these places were. So when they're talking about this rosy picture and like how sort of non-violent things probably were, I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, they were probably very violent. Yeah, we probably just don't hear about the stories.
I feel like Milton Friedman writes about this, and actually Michael Malice does in his Anarchist Handbook about how anarchy isn't it's distinct from utopia. It isn't utopic. It's just as violent as we are now. It's just as people lie, people cheat, people steal. There's no way to stop people from doing that. What it does is it deinstitutionalizes it.
Right.
So yes, we will all still lie to each other and steal from each other and rob each other and all the shit that we're doing right now. But there won't be a government that can also do it at a global scale. Yeah.
It's just the question of what's the standard of living look like under a system like that? You know?
I don't know.
And this is always the problem that I have with people who hate capitalism. It's just like you can't argue with the fact that the standard of living has gotten exponentially better under it. And I'm not saying that there aren't all these issues.
Well, I mean, there's people who will try to argue that, but yeah.
There are people that will try to argue that, but it's just like this is the Steven Pinker has a whole book about this.
Right.
It's just like you can't really argue with childhood mortality being like much less than it was 100 years ago. And all, but again, I agree. We have other issues that were sort of created by the system that we invented to get rid of some of the old problems that we had.
Right.
So now we have this. We have created new problems. I'm not disputing that. And and I mean, honestly, a lot of what I think about now is what is the best way to live in a society like this. You know, is like, because depression and all this stuff seems more of an outgrowth of the society than it is an issue with the individual. You know, that's just. Yeah, that's a whole.
You mean people like emotional depression, not the Great Depression.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, sort of. You have rampant sadness right now, and sort of You could say aimless.
People are very lost.
Yes, and exactly. I think we're trying. It's the same issue that you could have with somebody who comes in and wants you to treat their diabetes after 20 years of sort of eating junk food, and you're like, well, there's only so much I can do in the system, in the environment that you're living. And so anyway, it's a whole conversation we could have.
I mean, that's
this
a tough
isn't
problem.
anything new. Yes,
trying to help somebody who isn't personally taking the steps to help themselves, and who's living in a society that is not taking any steps to help them.
Right. And and the problem is we've gone, because as soon as you start talking about that kind of stuff, then somebody could be like, well, what are you saying? That you shouldn't help any. Like when you start talking about personal responsibility, then people are like, well, don't you have a heart and don't you want to help people? And you're like, yes, I do. How do we do both? Anyway, it's fine. We're getting off on
people
crazy
can say any
stuff
silly
right
thing
now.
they want. But yeah,
I know. But I've had conversations with.
I know the
about
conversation
this.
you're talking about.
Yes. And yes, okay. We're all over the place in this episode. I thought it was kind of interesting, the discussion of cosmetics and how that sort of played into it. Yeah. I think.
I actually, because I've read this chapter before, and I was looking back through the notes I made last time. I didn't make tons of notes on this chapter in the book. I feel like it's a pretty solid. It's like what we were saying. Like a lot of people probably wouldn't even disagree with it. It's interesting how much credit he gives to the prostitution industry for things. I mean, he talks about this a lot with racial integration, that there was racial integration in American society at the lowest rungs always, basically. Like brothels and bars and dance halls and stuff in New York City in the 1700s were racially integrated. Like this idea of just like this black and this white world that actually kind of exists now in many ways, did not exist at the lowest rungs of society until the civil rights movement. There's a later argument he makes. Yeah.
But although I think that's maybe in the cities, sure, but like I think there was still segregation in rural communities between poor whites and poor blacks.
Well, I think he would say no, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about this, but I thought that you still had, you had a lot of cultural So this is interesting because I actually had a high school teacher talk about this a lot when we were reading Huck Finn. He would always tell us how there was all these similarities between poor whites and poor blacks, and it was always sort of rich, basically wealthy people that were sort of always trying to put this, crux or whatever between them.
Yep.
What's the word I'm looking for? Wedge.
Like a divide?
Between them.
A wedge. Nice.
Yeah, wedge. So this is not a new sort of thought, but it was the first time I had heard that argument. And
it's just back to what I was saying. What I think the value in this is it's forcing us to face and question the assumptions that we have about the way society is. And I think we have this idea that our historical memory, like yours and mine, we can remember like maybe 25, 30 years ago personally, and then our sense of what history looked like is not very clear if we go back 30, 40, 50 years. And so there's a lot of stuff that happened in the 20th century of government getting involved in situations that there was no government involvement in at all in the 1700s. Yes. Not that there wasn't just as much racism and hatred and whatever. It's the difference is we're living in a world now where the government is involved in everything.
Right. No, I mean look at there was no income the first tax was the whiskey tax, and there was a rebellion about that. And now it's like,
Yeah, I mean income taxes from Woodrow Wilson
100 years ago,
1910s, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it didn't exist before the Federal Reserve, man. Don't even get me started, man.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
cool.
isn't that when it came about? Wasn't it with the Federal Reserve?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if it came before or after.
I think they're about the same time. Yep.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve. Yeah. Milton Friedman has a great history of what caused the Great Depression too. That really throws a wrench into people's narrative.
Yeah.
But
it is interesting how they made the Federal. Sorry, but they made the Federal Reserve because there were all these runs on banks, right? That was whatever the 1907 was the last big one before they implemented it. But then, it's just, not even 20 years after it.
And it didn't even do the thing it was designed to do.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
No comment, so Anthony.
What do we want to do next?
Oh God, I thought we already sort of decided.
Did we?
I think so. I think we're going to go to
Chapter 7, I assume.
Yeah. Is that the one I wouldn't say? Yes, it is. From white chimps to Yankee Doodles, the Irish. That might be kind of fun.
Yeah.
We're allowed to say it when we're talking about.
Yeah. I feel like that one people would be mad at us because they don't believe it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I'm probably staying away from that stuff for now.
Part 2 is out.
Yeah, I think so. That's right. Yeah. We were going to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
World War II stuff. Yeah, Behold a Dictator. Oh, yeah, and that kind of goes into everything we're talking about, too.
Sure.
We're going to talk about FDR and everything.
That's a good one. Yep.
So we'll do Chapter 11.
Nice. Behold a Dictator, Fascism and the New Deal.
Yeah. I wonder
so
if
this is going to be like anti-renegades. This is gonna...
Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder if we're going to be getting... When did he write this? Is this a recent book?
It's kind of old now, I think.
Okay. I mean, I wonder if he's going to basically get into that, like... Have you haven't read Machiavellian's The Defenders of Freedom, have you?
No.
It's an interesting book. I don't agree with everything, but it's certainly interesting. But the guy that wrote that also wrote a book called Managerial Revolution, and I think he talks about this. He was against FDR because this was the guy that basically I always forget his name. I mentioned his name in like the first episode. James Burroughs or something like that. But he was the guy who was like the mentor for William F. Buckley, the conservative guy. So
like an old conservative.
Exactly. He's like the grandfather of like the conservative movement.
I see.
In America. So again, I don't agree with everything in the book, but it certainly is an interesting thing, and it gives an interesting framework. Mm-hmm. That's just a possible book we could read at some point.
Yeah,
but yeah, no,
I'm not sure how Thaddeus would think if you. I don't know what he would think if you called him a conservative.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, what would he say he is? Libertarian?
I think he usually says he's closest to a libertarian, but he will not call himself a libertarian.
Yeah.
I don't know. A postmodernist, I think, is basically what he is.
Really interesting.
Oh yeah, that's his thing. He's a postmodernist historian.
Huh. So I can't get do you like postmodern?
Yeah.
Ism? Okay, yeah. Because honestly, I got the impression that you didn't, but then I sort of, for some reason,
I think that postmodernism is very valuable, but it's also self-defeating because it eats itself into nothing.
Right.
It just forces us to. It forces us to question our assumption. It's exactly what I was just talking about assuming that the world has always been just as government controlled because that's what we know. It's or I mean that's one way of putting it. Or assuming that the distant past looks something like it looks today. It might be completely different. And I think the big important pieces with postmodernism are questioning medical assumptions and legal and moral assumptions. So the idea that these types of people are criminally insane and this is what you must do with them. The idea that criminally insane is a definition. It forces you to face that's something you made up. That's not something that's real in nature. That's like you don't like how these people are behaving. It's causing a problem. And so now you've given it a little definition. And now you have a prescription for what to do with that definition.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can see what you mean by self-defeating, because it does get to this point as like, well, so where do you go with everything? Because this is what we were talking about before, is like basically every time you choose a model, you have model bias, and you've biased yourself again. Every time you take a step in one direction, you've made it harder to go in another direction.
Right.
And that's just the reality that I feel like this is the ultimate paradox that anybody that sort of studies models is going to understand at some point, is that so yeah, you have to almost choose a system. And so it's a question of which system. But I agree with you, is probably the best system to choose is one that is as sort of skeptical to to within reason, because you have, and that's my point, is like, I feel like unleashed postmodernism gets nowhere. But
yes, absolutely. Like you have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that even though
Yes.
I'm playing major and minor chords, that's not like some writ of nature. That's a construction.
Yeah, I don't know. See, even that's an interesting question. Because we were talking about this, is it gets back to like why would it seem to have something fundamental with how our brains perceive reality.
But there's cultures that don't even have major and minor chords.
Yep.
That have very what would I say?
Atonal.
Developed musical systems.
Right.
Indian music doesn't have major or minor chords.
Right. But there is a system of harmonies, as so far as I understand.
Right. So music as a structure is, and then there's different ways of doing it. Mm-hmm. And I can say like there's this harmonic series, and I can organize it this way, and that kind of works for this sort of thing, and I can organize it this way, and that kind of works for this sort of thing.
Yeah. Do they break out of the tonal system completely? I mean, I know they use
no. They have a tonal system. It's just a different tonal system.
That
so they have scales and they have leading tones and stuff like that.
I shouldn't have used tonal, but I guess I meant. Do they
have more
use
than
the
12
same?
notes? Yeah.
Yes. So they use because they have microtones. Yeah. So they use different frequency steps.
Right. But from their perspective, they're not microtones. That's the other.
Right.
Like microtone is a definite.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. No. Yeah. These are all great points. Yeah. And I agree with all of them. Honestly.
I'm starting to not believe you. Are you being honest?
No, I'm not. You found me out. Cool.
All right, so some fascism next week.
Yeah. This is your favorite, huh? You love fascism, don't you?
No, I don't.
No?
Okay, I have the Antifa handbook on my shelf.
Oh, goodness. Really? Who wrote
that?
that?
It's a terrible book. It's so badly written. It's awful.
Who wrote it?
What's his name? Mark Bray. He's like a Berkeley guy.
Interesting.
No good.
What's it like? What does it talk about?
I don't know. It's a very Marxist way of talking about the history of anti-fascism, and I don't know. It's kind of silly. It's like it's not very interesting or seemingly historically accurate. Like to me, the Thaddeus Russell book could be completely historically inaccurate, and I still think it's interesting.
Sure.
The argument's interesting, whether he's right about all the facts.
Yeah. When was it written? And is the guy a professor?
With the Antifa one?
I
think it was written in like 2016 or something.
Oh, so it's pretty new. Okay. Yeah. And is he a professor?
I think he was like a master's student or something. Or maybe he was a doctoral student. I don't know.
Interesting.
It was like the height of the Antifa thing before the pandemic, and
so this dude is like our age.
Yes. Oh yeah. He is our age. Yep.
Isn't it funny how that like discredits people? When you're like, okay, I'll believe it if it was like written like 30 years ago, but you tell me it's some dude my age just wrote this last year. Yeah, okay, okay. No, but it's funny. I've noticed that bias in myself all the time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah, because I could get into this whole other thing about that. I feel like we talked about where in music. Mm-hmm. It's like we had that same bias where it's like, we sort of pay attention to old music and we don't pay as much attention to new music in academic music, I should say,
Yep.
But it honestly is kind of the opposite in medicine and science, and which is a question you almost asked me, or you did ask me before, about how. I guess you sort of asked it. How open is science and medicine to new ideas? I guess this isn't quite that. It's more of like, how open is medicine to, I guess, prepared ideas? I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, what you're talking about, it makes me think of, I'm sure you've had this conversation where you're working on a song and somebody asks you if you know a real song.
No, I actually haven't gotten that.
Oh, interesting. I hear that a lot where it's like, well, just because I wrote it yesterday doesn't make it not a real song. Because their idea of a real song is something recorded professionally, blah 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 blah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's all right. Prepared. I don't know what I meant by prepared ideas. Really, what I just meant is like, you almost do want you want a certain type of cutting edge in science. You don't want anything too crazy, but you want something that sort of fits in the dogma of what the sort of established people have been thinking about. But that is the stuff that's going to get paid attention to probably more than even necessarily a paper from like the 80s, especially if it was only cited a few times. I don't know though. I'll probably cut this out.
Okay. Or just bleep the whole thing, so it's like 5 minutes.
Bleep the whole thing. Yeah, bleeping. Yeah, no, I probably won't, but I don't know. Cool. Well, I feel we probably did it, right?
I think we did it. Yeah. Sorry I didn't get back to you yesterday.
Oh, it's fine.
Till late. It was like, I saw the text and I was like, I don't know. I got to figure this out. And then I didn't.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, no, I mean, there's just a possibility it'll run late tomorrow, so. This is better. We'll probably still push for a Thursday release, but I'll just probably work on it, and then whenever I finish it, I'll just push it out. But it'll definitely be by Thursday.
Yeah, well, we lost all our listeners. What happened?
I know, dude. I'm thinking that it must be Fountain does this same kind of thing that like TikTok does,
like a
where
push.
they're like, yeah, Yeah, I think that's what probably happened. Yeah, we forgot to talk about that. Yeah, we've
gone from 50 million to 7.
Yeah. That's quite the drop. I just assumed a large population of the part of the population died somewhere. No, I'm just kidding.
So maybe our second episode was awesome, and then that third one sucked.
Maybe too. Well,
actually, I think our second episode was our best episode. I do think that.
The Vesalius one?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I've also thought about titles. This is something that because I always end up just choosing titles. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about titles for this episode. But
I feel like we should pay attention while we're talking, and if we say something kind of like silly or interesting.
Yeah, because I honestly thought the Intractable Truth title might have been one of the other things. Cause I don't know. I just thought that was
like it's title. A little much.
No, I thought it was good. I mean, that's the one that has the most views.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like the Tom Cruise and Turtles episode, it doesn't really have anything to do with the episode. Intractable Truth doesn't really either, but I don't know. And then the fourth one, I just tried to add the name in Gallon because I figured, But yeah, I don't know. Any ideas of names for this episode?
Something about whores.
Are you sure? No. Is that going to get us censored? Anthony. No, yeah. Yeah, I like, yeah, they have some interesting names in this chapter. But no,
I don't know, I don't know. Moral degradation of society. I don't know.
I kind of like that.
The pros and cons of moral degradation.
The pros and cons of moral decay. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right, cool. So chapter 11 next week. All right. Sweet.
All right,
and we'll go back on to Wednesday next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. All right.
Cool. All right, see you.